Now let's have a look at the changes introduced to the PMBOK Guide 6th edition, and there have been a lot of changes to the PMBOK Guide. It's a smaller quantum leap than we saw in going to the PMBOK Guide 3rd edition, but it's still a lot. There's good news and there's bad news. It's all good news in terms of the changes. The PMBOK Guide 6th edition is once more positioned to stay in the lead. The review team has done a magnificent job. The bad news is that there are so many changes that if you have study materials for the PMBOK Guide 5th edition or earlier, you really can't use them to study for this edition. And even if you're a PMBOK Guide Black Belt, you really need to study the 6th edition or you will quickly get left behind. If the review team had just completed the restructuring and the reformatting, which they have done, project managers would have been pretty happy. But what they actually achieved was like going up 2 levels, i.e. a number of improvements in the 6th edition I would not have expected until the 7th edition. So a big thank you again to the review team. But once again, it reinforces my earlier statement that you need to throw out your pre-6th edition study materials. I'd use only materials specifically designed for the PMBOK Guide 6th edition. Using the earlier ones, trust me, will be a real false economy. They actually will cause you to fail the examination. The standard for project management, which is an ANSI or American National Standards Institute standard, was developed by PMI. And then PMI based the PMBOK Guide on this standard. Many people get confused by this. They think that the PMBOK Guide is the ANSI standard, and I've heard many people say that, but it is not. It is based upon the PMI ANSI standard. You will find the standard for project management in part 2 of the PMBOK Guide 6th edition, starting from page 539, and you'll find it is very close to the PMBOK Guide. An ANSI standard has to be reviewed every 5 years to keep it relevant. After the review, it can be updated, left as is, or deleted, retired. And PMI decided to take the opportunity to perform significant updates because project management is constantly changing, and PMI needed to ensure that both the standard and the PMBOK Guide are still in alignment with today's project management profession. The PMBOK Guide review was headed by a 10-person committee from Australia, Israel, the UK, Spain, Canada and the US. The members were from across industry and government, and at least 5 of them had PhDs. And don't worry, I'm not going to go into all the history and rationale, interesting as it is, because I know you're anxious to discover what the actual changes are. I don't want to keep you waiting. With the release of the PMBOK Guide 3rd edition, PMI realised that there were 3 inputs that were common to many processes, which were the scope statement, work breakdown structure, and the work breakdown structure dictionary. And so they decided to group them together into a single input, which we now know as the scope baseline. In a sense, they have used that sort of grouping, but in a much greater extent in the 6th edition, because this time they have grouped inputs, tools and techniques and outputs. However, first we need to know a little bit about the documents and plans in use in a project. And I've done a lot of work in this in the PMBOK 6th edition, and you can see this in table 4.1. Now that shows the typical contents of the project plan, a total of 18 items made up of 12 sub-plans, 4 baselines. I know the scope baseline is actually a group of 3 baselines, as I mentioned earlier, plus the life cycle description and the development approach. And I can see this sort of thing coming up in the examination because it's never been just this clear before. On the right hand side of the table are the project documents, and there are 33 of these. The project documents, also known as project management documents, are used by the project team and can be updated by the project team. That's important. But as you can see, they are not included in the project management plan. And right away, I can see several examination questions out of this single table. You can, of course, tailor your project to use more or less items in the project management plan and the project documents, or you can split them on larger projects and combine them on small ones and so on. But the reason I'm showing you this is that in the PMBOK Guide 6th edition, any of these items, when they appear as inputs or outputs, will be grouped under the project management plan or project documents. So that's a huge change in itself, as we'll see later on. Okay, in fact, let's have a look to see how this works. We can examine figure 6.2.2, control schedule, inputs, tools and techniques and outputs. And as you can see, although all inputs and outputs are still itemized, they are grouped under project management plan or project documents. This is now essential because you will find a big increase in the number of inputs and outputs for some processes, and that will keep on happening with later releases of the PMBOK Guide. Here are the inputs to control schedule from the PMBOK Guide 5th edition. In the 5th edition, there were 6 inputs, but in the 6th edition, you can see 11 itemized inputs. In the 5th edition, there are also 6 outputs, but in the 6th edition, you can see 14 itemized outputs. In fact, the overall number of ITOs has increased by 17% from 618 to 722. I believe this grouping technique is a huge improvement in the new PMBOK Guide because you can clearly see the logic from the groupings. And there is another improvement too in the same area. Did you notice that the tools and techniques have been grouped as well? Data analysis has 6 elements, but a total of 13 itemized tools and techniques. And you can see in figure 8.3, plan quality management inputs, tools and techniques and outputs, that there are 4 groupings of tools and techniques, i.e. data gathering, data analysis, decision making and data representation. I find this to be very valuable. I know you will too. It may not seem it now, it may seem to be a lot of stuff to remember, but trust me, compared with previous versions of the PMBOK, this is a big improvement. When the team was revising the PMBOK Guide for the 6th edition, they realised that although the tools and techniques have been growing with each edition, research showed that a number of them are rarely used. And so they analysed them with an affinity diagram to work out the common groupings of tools and techniques. And they discovered they could be largely grouped into the following 6 groupings. They are, including example elements, data gatherings, that's brainstorming, focus groups, surveys, data analysis, typically variance analysis, reserve analysis, document analysis, decision making, voting, multi-criteria decision analysis, interpersonal and team skills, awareness and leadership, communication skills, including feedback, presentation, active listening, and data representation such as flowcharts, histograms, mind maps and scatter diagrams. Now let's look at the structure of the PMBOK Guide. There is new section 2, the environment where projects operate, which covers the enterprise environmental factors, governance, organisational process assets, processes, policies, procedures, organisational systems. And a new section 3, the role of the project manager, which includes the project manager's sphere of influence, project management competencies, and a comparison between leadership and management. Some of this material is new, but a lot has been drawn from other areas of the PMBOK Guide. But it's a real benefit to learning having all this information logically formatted and framed in the one place. Section 3, the role of the project manager, is also linked to the talent triangle because increasingly a project manager needs to apply business skills and general manager type skills to projects. There's also a strong need to understand industry and financial implications, especially in very large projects and multinational projects. As well as needing technical management skills, there's also a strong need for strategic and business management, benefits management and leadership, including emotional intelligence, problem solving, team building and influence to lead the team and manage projects efficiently and effectively. And these needs are addressed in this section along with professional competencies and personality characteristics that the project managers need. Okay, now we come to the knowledge areas. A unified structure has been applied to each chapter. Thankfully, we've seen it come through in bits and pieces from the 3rd edition. Now we've just about arrived. And these are introduction to the section, processes, description of the ITOs, the inputs, tools and techniques and outputs. Also 4 new subsections have been added to each. The key concepts, trends and emerging policies, that shows what's starting to happen in the project management sphere but can't yet be considered mainstream. Tailoring considerations, topics to think about when tailoring project documents and processes rather than instructions for actually applying the tailoring. And considerations for agile and adaptive environments, and we've seen a big uptake in these areas. There are still 10 knowledge areas, thankfully, no more to learn, and they are still in the same order, which I'm really pleased about. However, 2 knowledge areas have been renamed. The team decided it was impossible to manage time. Maybe they discovered that when they were revising the PMBOK. But anyway, they say time progresses at a constant rate, and so that what you're actually managing is what happens within a time period, i.e. managing the schedule. And this now brings it into alignment with PMI practice standard for scheduling. And as the name suggests, a practice standard helps you put PMI theory into practice. And if you're a member of PMI, you can download online versions of these practice standards free of charge, and you can really boost your ability to manage projects once you get a hang of these. And so project time management has been renamed to project schedule management. So this one's just a name change. With project human resource management, however, the change is more than skin deep. It has been changed to project resource management, and now it manages all resources, i.e. what they call team resources, the people, and physical resources. That's everything else. That's tools, equipment, machinery, consumables, concrete, bricks, whatever. I was wondering why the PMBOK guide says team resources rather than the more usual human resources, but perhaps that's an expectation that we might see robots taking team positions, or even the project manager role might be a robot in the not too distant future, who knows. 3 processes have been added, 1 moved and 1 has been removed. The 3 processes added are manage project knowledge, implement risk responses, control resources. 1 process moved is estimate activity resources, moved from what is now called schedule management to resource management, and 1 process removed, close procurements, because they worked out that the project manager very rarely actually closes procurements. This brings the total number of processes in the PMBOK 6th edition, PMBOK Guide 6th edition I should say, to 49. And this is a popular examination question. How many processes does the PMBOK Guide have? If you know this answer, just tick the 49. You got 1 mark. All questions on the examination have 1 single mark. You could spend half a page working out a complicated answer and get a mark, or you can just know the simple answer, 49, and you've got the same mark. So try to get the easy marks, the low-hanging fruit. Manage project knowledge. There is a lot of knowledge generated in a project, even if the project fails, and that's an important point too. But the problem is with the knowledge, although it's paid for by the organisation, it's seldom retained. And so they have to make the same mistakes and rediscover the same solutions and make the same plans over and over and over again. Managed project knowledge is intended to reduce this shortfall by building a pragmatic, knowledge-retaining culture into the project environment. This knowledge will be treated like an asset, which it is, and will be recorded, managed, stored and passed on to future projects within the organisation. In fact, in some instances, knowledge can be sold to organisations, but make sure it's a legal sale. Don't try to sell information you've learned from working somewhere else. It's stored in the lessons learned register during the project, which is then an input to many processes. At the end of the project, the lessons learned register will be edited and added to the organization's lessons learned repository. And so the repository is where you're building up cross-project knowledge within the organization over time, and that's a really valuable asset. The next change is absolutely amazing, not just because it's a great process, but because it's never been included in the PMBOK guide before. In fact, when I was giving a presentation recently and mentioned this process, project managers in the audience argued that it was in the previous versions of the PMBOK guide, and I had to stop and show them from the PMBOK guide 5th and 4th editions and prove that it wasn't there. Now, what is this essential mysterious process then? It's called implement risk responses. In previous editions of the PMBOK guide, we identified the risks, analysed and assessed them, developed responses, and then just stopped. We didn't actually stop, of course. It's just that the previous versions of the PMBOK guide assumed that the risk responses would somehow be implemented in the project activities. But such an assumption is dangerous and actually adds risk to the project. In project procurement management, the closed procurements process in closing process group was deleted because the review team discovered that it was extremely rare for a project manager to actually close the resources. This is usually left to a contract expert, and so the administrative procedure closure activity was moved to integration management. Some processes were renamed. Control in general was renamed to monitor to reflect the more facilitative and collaborative approach. The processes that changed name were perform quality assurance, section 8.2, manage quality, human resource management, section 9.1, plan resource management, acquire project team, section 9.2, to acquire resources, develop project team, section 9.3, to develop team, manage project team, section 9.4, to manage team, control communications, section 10.3, to monitor communications, control risks, section 11.6, to monitor risks, plan stakeholder engagement, section 13.2, plan stakeholder engagement, and control stakeholder engagement, section 13.4, to monitor stakeholder engagement. Knowledge area changes. Project integration management, a new process, manage project knowledge, was added as mentioned before. More emphasis has been placed on incorporating lessons learned. Also, some information about closed procurements has been added, as I mentioned earlier too, because you moved the administrative procurement closure activity to integration management, because PMI's research suggests that most PMs often validate against the statement of work and confirm the work is actually complete, but they don't actually close procurements. Scope management, business analysis and agile methods have been mentioned in the scope because they are becoming more popular. In schedule management, which was previously called time management, agile methods are mentioned here too, but not particular methodologies, as schedule management focuses on scheduling. Resource management, which was previously human resource management, estimating resources has been moved to this knowledge area. Cost management, that's had almost no changes. Quality management, there's been a shift away from quality assurance to managing quality, which is a larger thing than just the quality assurance. A new technique, test planning, has been added. Also added problem solving and testing and product evaluation. Resource management, formerly human resource management, a lot of changes because this knowledge area includes all resources. Physical resources have been added to team resources. The plan, estimate and acquire processes cover both types of resources. Develop team and manage team cover, well, just team resources, of course, and control processes for just physical resources. Communications management, this has been updated to include social computing and social networks, political awareness, cultural awareness, and communication skills. These are intended to make it more human-focused. There's also a clean-up of the terminology to differentiate between communication without an S as the exchange of information and communications with an S, meaning the sharing of communication. And communications includes both the technology and the artifacts. Now we come to risk management. Implement risk responses has been added. As mentioned previously, the PMBOK guide went just as far as plan risk responses. As I mentioned earlier too, previously it was assumed that the responses would be implemented as part of the project work somehow, but with risks this is a dangerous assumption. The control risks process is now monitor risks. Stakeholder management has had many changes to bring it up to best practice. Procurement management also received quite a makeover as it was agreed it was out of touch with modern practice, especially with large procurements, computerized procurement applications and international and multinational contracts. Other key changes, there's a greater emphasis on benefits management, which I'm particularly pleased to see as I'm a Prince 2 practitioner as well. A new risk response escalate has been introduced. The purpose of that one is this is just too big for us to handle. Project can't handle it. We've got to hand it up to executive management, let them take care of it. Several agile concepts have been introduced to develop schedule process. The concept of business documents, which consists of business case and business management plan, have been introduced, and take care not to mistake the business documents with the project documents. The business documents are just these two things, the business case and the benefits management plan. And as you find later on in the course, that the project documents, the 33 project documents, can be modified by the project team. The business documents, the business case and the benefits management plan cannot be modified by the project team. The project manager can recommend changes to, say, the sponsor, for example, but can't actually make those changes. Several new tools and techniques have been introduced, a new appendix on tailoring considerations and a new appendix on practices used in the adaptive environment. And there are many other small changes too, but hopefully I've given you a good understanding of the key changes in the PMBOK Guide 6th edition.